Welcome to another episode of Fueling Conversations, a Sport Nutrition Education Network podcast with Dr. James Fleming. Today's episode marks the first in our athlete-centered series, Beyond the Plate, where we dive into the lives and fueling strategies of elite performers. Joining us is Ellis Cross, a professional distance runner whose journey has taken him from training in Cowfield to beating Mo Farah and recently signing with Hoka. In this episode, Ellis shares the moment he outran Mo Farah and how it changed his career, the struggle of balancing university life with elite level training, his fueling strategies for high mileage and intense sessions, a behind the scenes glimpse into Team Makou's dynamic and support system, his advice for young athletes on consistency, mindset and enjoying the process. Whether you're a runner, student athlete, coach, nutritionist or simply looking for a dose of inspiration, this episode has something for you. Let's get into it. Hi Ellis, thanks for joining us. Excited to have you here. Can you just give us a bit of an introduction to who you are, what you're currently doing, and you can give us a bit of an insight into how you're now stuck in the snow in America too.
I'm Ellis Cross. Thanks for having me on, James. Starting. I'm currently a Hoka professional athlete, distance athlete. So kind of focusing on the 5K, 10K half marathon, and we'll be moving up to the marathon in the near future. Currently away on training camp for the next 4 weeks, targeting a fast 10K in LA at the end of March. I've been with my group now for literally 1 year, and performances have improved massively since I changed kind of my whole setup. As you say, kind of stuck in the snow up here at altitude, so it makes things even harder because training at altitude, less oxygen is kind of what we do before all major races, just to make life a lot easier when you drop down to sea level and you've got so much more oxygen to kind of work with, but having the snow as well to deal with is just an extra hurdle to get over.
Yeah, nice. Well, thanks for coming, mate. And I guess we'll delve straight into kind of a bit of history, and I'll talk to you about kind of times and give so the audience have a bit of an indication of how fast you're running and some of your aspirations moving forward. So how did you get into the kind of endurance space? Go back to, was it when you were like a teenager, or how did it come about?
Yeah, so it kind of started in primary school, actually. Like, me getting into running is quite an odd and quite a kind of funny story, I guess. So for some reason, I basically, in year 6 was when I started running. So would have been 9 or 10. So I think it was around 10, basically, that I started running then. And basically, I used to get sent home for lunch because apparently I was either too active, so I was always running on the grass on the field when I wasn't supposed to because it was too muddy, and I did it one too many times apparently. And I had to get picked up for lunch. But I lived in such a small village. It was such a small primary school I went to, so I used to get picked up at lunch by either my mum or my nan or whoever was basically around. And basically, my family were like, "Look, because you're not having your typical lunchtime at the school running around, we had a field out the back of our house that we just called the cow field, and it was probably like 1 kilometre long. It wasn't too far, and my mum or my nan would always be like, right, let's go there. You can run 1 lap of that, and then come back and do whatever you want with the rest of your time." So I got there, and then I got more competitive with it because we'd time it basically, and I just enjoyed the thrill of trying to run basically a personal best every single day, which is not the most effective way to train, I'll be honest with you. But that's kind of how it started. And then throughout school, I carried on. I joined my local athletics club in Tamworth. Started to realise that I was becoming quite good at it. Probably because I was training too much as a youngster, to be honest. I was just overtraining. But then I kind of managed that, joined a club, was really enjoying it. And then I decided to obviously go to St Mary's, where obviously I met yourself, to focus purely on athletics and also study alongside it. And St Mary's is obviously great for that. And performances, I didn't realise that it was going to be something that could potentially become my full-time job. So I'm very fortunate in that sense. And then performances took off whilst I was at university, and obviously other big notable performances that have led to me being able to essentially get a sponsorship with Hoka, who are a pretty big brand in the game now, and they've been supporting me since sort of 2017 really. So I've been around the brand for a long time, and currently with my team known as Team Makou, only recently set up in the last sort of year, and things are going swimmingly well, really.
I love that. Was it always running that was the interest for you, or did you go down the typical kind of boy route of football? Sort of, were you always
Yeah.
sport specialization? I'm going to be a runner.
No, I was, yeah, it was always football for me. To be honest, when we kind of started doing running, we kind of did it because we thought it would benefit football, really. So it was kind of a byproduct of the football. But obviously the reality kind of setting in that football is, to make it, if you like. And I was always competitive and always kind of strived to want to be a professional in some sort of sporting capacity. I knew it'd be much more realistic down the running route. But obviously, yeah, I still love football to this day. And but yeah, running took the front and centre of my life really, and has done ever since I was sort of 15, 16.
And who's your team again? Just so some people
But
listening to get annoyed.
I'm Birmingham City.
Nice, they're doing all right.
Birmingham
They're all
City
right. I mean, they
supporter.
went down back up.
Yeah, we went down, and I think it's done us the world of good, to be honest. New ownership, and hopefully going to Wembley.
Then you'll be there or thereabouts, won't you?
So-
So can you talk us through kind of the university space? So I remember you being there. I'm sure there was talking about like a vest or something. What sort of distances were you doing? What did a training week look like? How did you manage that messy period? Because I know there'll be some people looking at this going, "Oh, I'm a student athlete or a dual athlete, dual career athlete,"
Mhm.
where they're trying to juggle work and trying to push on to being like a professional. How hard is that?
Yeah, I think I was very fortunate in the sense that St Mary's kind of works really well with athletes and academics in terms of managing that, and sort of, yeah, you kind of landed on my feet a little bit with going to St Mary's, to be honest with you, and living with like-minded individuals that were also training and wanting to compete at the very top, also studying alongside. It took a bit of time getting used to, I think, as any sort of university life does for anyone really. The year that I went to university, I basically arrived with a crop of unbelievable athletes. So I was very far from being one of the best athletes. And I think training with much like significantly better guys basically pushed me on to that next level. So that helped massively. I think with the studying, like I say, we're very fortunate that St Mary's were, very flexible in managing our kind of time in. And obviously we had two coaches as well at St Mary's, in both Mick and Craig, who were very flexible and able to work, and they were always on campus. So we had such good contact. We're very fortunate, really. But at the same time, it was difficult because you're going through a time of life where you're also kind of establishing what you want to do in terms of career, and you're also weighing up whether becoming essentially a professional athlete, because a lot of the people that I went to university with were, striving to be professional athletes, and you're kind of working out for yourself whether or not that's going to be a possibility. And for me, it took significantly longer, to be honest with you. Obviously, it took until even after I graduated, I still thought there's a chance here. So I managed even working and training at that level, which was very difficult. And I always say to so many people, being in that sub-elite category is probably the toughest position you can be in. Just because the elite, obviously, they can focus purely on training, recovering, doing what they need to do to be the best. Whereas a sub-elite, if you're working alongside, you're balancing kind of a lot of life. It's very difficult to compete with those guys, because they've already got a step on you, and they're very good. And yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll spend some time actually in that space in a second. Can we just spend a bit of time on how you managed, you know, university, moving away from home, being at St Mary's? We're not going to talk about the point system too much because I'll probably lose my job. But how did you manage the fueling? And can you give us a bit of an insight into how many miles you were doing a week for your distance at
Yeah.
the point as well?
Okay, so when I went to university, I was probably doing, in terms of mileage, so I work in miles, not kilometers, but I was probably doing 50 to 60 miles a week. And that basically gradually increased to sort of 70 miles a week. And I was averaging probably around 70 miles a week throughout my whole university life. Sort of like typical week would be, we would do three somewhat intense training sessions a week. So on a Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, we'd all get together and do a hardish session. And on Monday, Wednesday were like easy recovery runs. Friday would always be a rest day for me, and then a Sunday was a long run where everyone could kind of get together because obviously there's no university going on that Sunday for us anyway as undergraduates. So we were able to get a big group out. So again, very fortunate with that. And I mean, in terms of like the fueling, as well as you say, with the point system, we were fortunate to have the refectory where we were catered for and we could go and have our evening meals there. So we only had to kind of manage the nutrition side of things for breakfast and lunch, which was pretty simple, to be honest with you. I think having that evening meal there for us was a blessing.
I guess is there any advice for you? Because I don't want to go too heavy on the culture of, running and how the fine margins are between, under fueling and being bang on and getting fast and all those sorts of things. But I think it would be silly to skirt around it too much. But can you give any insights or advice on how you did manage, getting enough in? Like, what is your approach, or what has been your approach to fueling? Because you're doing quite high mileage, you're still growing. You're aspiring towards people that I think you've already mentioned are better than you, more experienced than you. So it could be quite easy to do too much.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, for me, I've always been of the mentality that like I'm very relaxed, very, very relaxed around food. I think for me, it is as straightforward as I eat when I'm hungry. I know that I need to put fuel into my body to be able to train and compete at the level that I'm wanting to. But I also appreciate that my metabolism is probably sky high because the amount of training that I do, I there's barely 5 minutes that goes by where I'm not somewhat feeling hungry. So honestly, I spend so much money on food. And again, for me, it's mainly avoiding the junk, sweet kind of foods because I do have a sweet tooth. And it's kind of like looking at ways to replace the junk stuff because I do eat some junk food. It's just part and parcel. I just go with whatever the brain's sort of craving at that time, and I don't want to kind of like fight that. But I've got better recently in terms of replacing junk with just better foods that are going to be a bit more nutritious for me, like yogurts and a bit more protein rich stuff that are going to enhance recovery, but also be quite filling as well.
A little bit more on the timing of intake and not sweating too much about total intake. I think it's quite refreshing actually. Having a relaxed mindset around this when you've got so much going on and you've already got the pressures from your sponsors, from yourself, from the loved ones, and all that stuff. Is you kind of want to reduce that noise, right? You don't want to add more burden, more pressure. And actually, you mentioned bad foods, but you got to remember you're like a Ferrari, right? Compared to most, people's Fords that are just banging along down the road. So you saying bad food actually might just be sometimes needed to be food, and it might not.
Yeah, I think
important.
I think for me as well, I'd lived around eating disorders as well, so I'd kind of seen sort of like, I guess I'd seen people around me, like, well, obviously my best friend really that went through a really bad eating disorder, and it does affect males as we know as well, and seeing the effect and impact that had was tough, like quite eye opening as well.
I guess you're quite lucky as well to a degree. You were doing a sports science course, so you were
Yeah,
dipped into a bit of that too. But
for
can
sure.
we go into the aspect then between you at university? You're a good athlete, but and obviously I was your dissertation supervisor. I knew you were, you had a nice picture of you in an old GB vest at some point when you were about 16 or something, and you were still quite chill, quite relaxed. But we didn't know that you were on the radar of being a pro. Really, we knew you were a good athlete, and there's lots of good athletes out there. So then, what happened post university to where we got to now? What were some of the big milestones?
Okay, so when I graduated, I decided I was going to give myself another couple of years, and because I'm originally from the Midlands, just north of Birmingham, actually, I didn't. I knew going home, moving and back from university wouldn't have been best for performance for sure, because living and training around Teddington is essentially the best, but it costs. It comes at a cost to live in that sort of environment, and it's a heavy cost. So I balanced working. I was working two jobs. So I worked in running retail for sort of like 25, 30 hours a week. And I'd also work coaching athletics as like extracurricular in schools on the 2 days that I wasn't working basically. And I managed that whilst training. But the biggest thing for me was I decided essentially in 2022 to take holiday from work to go on an altitude training camp and do essentially what I'm doing now. And it's a lot easier for me to do it now. I've got that flexibility and no kind of stress of jobs to manage. But I had to get essentially holiday off both jobs to go on an altitude training camp, which I thought that it would almost be my last crack, to be honest with you, heading into the season. And then I was always starting my season with a 10K at the Vitality 10K in London, and I turned up there, and that was the biggest turning point for me. Obviously, beating some Mo Farah in that home straight essentially changed my life, to be honest with you. And I do actually look back at that and think, had I not beaten Mo on that day in the last 100 meters, there's a good chance I wouldn't be here today. There's a good chance I probably wouldn't be competing, because it was sort of hanging on a knife edge in terms of, do I continue doing what I'm doing, balancing, or go down the career path, or what? And I knew it was getting towards the end of
Yeah, and I
that,
think it was
being able to do it.
outside looking in. Like I remember, we get you to do some talks for us every year. It's I get the most out of knowing you, Ellis, right, on a very cheap budget.
Yeah.
But I remember, we were booked to have you in, and then all of a sudden I was like, why is Ellis on the TV? Why is he talking to Eamon Holmes? Why is he like all this
I
stuff?
know,
I was like, because it kind of blew up, didn't it? Because they made you out as if you were like
massive.
some guy who's never ran before. But
Yeah,
did
well,
you meet? You miss some sort of entry form or something?
yeah, well, I think no. So everyone loves an underdog story, don't they? And I think I don't know what it was. I mean, the nation kind of just got on Mo Farah's back, really, and I think people were a bit worried that it was like the beginning of the end, really, for him, which essentially it kind of was, really, for him. But the level that he's trained at, competed at for so many years, you can only do it for so long. It takes its toll on the body. But it kind of it blew up because I had to pay my entry. I wasn't essentially in that elite category, so I had to travel myself in that morning at like silly o'clock, like 5 a.m. So I didn't have the most ideal preparation, not being elite. So I started on the start line. Essentially, it was a little bit behind those elites, and managed to cause a massive upset. And obviously, the thing is all the press were there, so they were already in position for Mo to win, and they just wanted to capture that. So me beating them, they were like a bit like, we've got an even bigger story here. And I think it's only really years on that I can look back and think like, that was kind of mental, because you can't take things like that in at all. You're just kind of
Just
going
for
with it.
context as well, sorry to jump in. Is what
So,
was your expectation of that event? Like, what was your previous 10K time? Was it a PB, or was it like, where did it kind of sit?
yeah, I was shooting for a PB, but it was being used, to be honest, as a race, as a hard hit out, as a bit of like race stimulus for the rest of the season. And it just turns out that it was the biggest race essentially in my life to date, in terms of like, it had the biggest impact on changing my life and getting me that sponsorship essentially with Hoka, and people seeing the potential might be there. So I could add value to a brand, and
Was it a PB?
it was, yeah, it was quite a big PB as well at the time.
Go on, what was it for the audience?
I ran 28:40, which was a PB, but also running around the streets of London. That time it was quick, because London's typically not that fast. It's quite windy, and where the kind of race takes place, kind of going up into Trafalgar Square, it's not the easiest
Have you been
either.
back since or not?
I have, but not. It changed basically. That race changed from being a massive sort of like the British Championships
Yeah, yeah.
to a bit more of a fun event. Really, I think it changed because of the coronation of the King one year, and they've just kept it. So it's at a different time of year, so it doesn't really fit my schedule either
Can we
anymore.
talk through that evening, because I do remember this story is great to share. So the night before the 10K, you've had a good altitude camp. You're going to throw everything at it and see what happens. So talk me through your fueling strategy the day before the event and on race day.
So yeah, day before, I mean, I think I had just like my simple sort of like breakfast and lunch, to be honest. And breakfast for me is typically either toast or porridge. I think on race day, I think back then I was a bit more stressed, so I would kind of overdo it almost on race day. I think sometimes I do or tend to overthink my fueling going into a race, and probably need to be a little bit more chilled and just do stick to what I know in training, because I know it doesn't cause any issues. But I would have had probably porridge in the morning. Then my lunch would have been potentially a little bit of pasta. I'm trying to think. I think I might have had like a smallish bowl of pasta. Just would have just been like tomato chicken pasta, and I would have probably gone for well, I know I went for the exact same in the evening, but I remember that evening I ate quite early, and I was really hungry and sort of like craving sweet foods, which typically happens. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, to be honest, but I live literally around the corner from the co-op at this point. So I thought I'm just going to pop round there and just kind of see what they've got, because I had no sort of dessert in, and they had Soleros in, which I hadn't had for ages, and I absolutely love a Solero. Um, so I bought like, I think it was like a 4 pack of Soleros, might have been a 3 pack of Soleros, but once I had one, I was like, oh, I don't think it'd be too bad to have another, and ended up just finishing the box, which my housemates were kind of like, "What are you doing? You're meant to be racing tomorrow. You've basically just ruined your race." Like, they completely thought I'd ruined my race off eating that box of Soleros, and obviously kind of proved them wrong. But maybe I would have won it a bit more comfortably had I not had all those
Who
Soleros.
knows? You definitely saturated the muscle glycogen there, I reckon, quite quickly. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
and
great
then
story.
yeah, I think after we just had we went for a curry afterwards to kind of like it's to celebrate
Yeah,
really.
of course. And I guess that's got to be part of it, right? You've done all the hard work. You've just had a massive win. So then from there to today, so what's spiraled? How did it come around? Because still beyond that, a lot of noise. You're still a
Yeah.
part-time athlete. You're still working 2 jobs. Like, what happened next?
Yeah. So after that, I struggled, to be honest with you, for the next sort of like 6 months, just with like the pressure, because like I'd been sort of at the front of the press for that sort of week, 2 weeks, and I did kind of struggle for the like month or so after that. I think doing all the press and stuff, I was having to get up at like. I was getting picked up at like 5 a.m. to go and do like TV or radio like interviews, and it was hindering training. And obviously, it's something that I'm not used to and was never used to, and I'm probably never going to be used to. But it was, I was just struggling to manage the training and stuff. So races didn't go well, and I kind of put it down to that. I was kind of stressed, had the pressure. But fortunately, Hoka decided to take a punt on me and offered me a contract. I think I signed a 2 year contract at the time. Um, and at that point, I was kind of like, the money was massive, massive help in terms of, I was like, oh my God, I can lose a bit of weight off my shoulders in terms of a job. But at the same time, I always wanted to get better. I didn't want to be that guy that was just remembered as the club runner that beat Mo Farah. I had bigger aspirations than that. And then, the next 2 years, whilst I was under contract, I managed to step away from working. And again, gave it a crack. Luckily, I had that funding, so it kind of felt like I'd gone back to where I was at with university, because student finance is probably the best funding you can have as an athlete, to be completely honest with you. So I had that, and again, I just balanced it, but I was able to utilize the time with the money that they paid me. I was able to spend more time on training, going to the gym, making sure I'm doing everything right, just recovering. I was on my feet all the time with working, and it's tough. And I was able to train much more intense. And I think when you're working, you do have to balance the training load much more. There's much more of a fine balance there before you kind of tip over the edge and sort of overdo it and cause injury and things like that. And again, fueling massive. When I was working, I was just popping over to the co-op, getting a meal deal, and that's kind of all I'd have. But now I'm able to look and have proper lunches, my eggs, avocado on toast. I wouldn't have been able to make that during work. We didn't even have a kitchen, no hobs. So I'm very fortunate to kind of have that. And now I just signed recently a new contract again, because performances have improved. So again, very grateful. And again,
How
I'm super fortunate. I'm super fortunate.
how, for example, does that work for those that don't understand the industry? You've got yourself a contract. Is it how much
Yeah.
pressure is on you having to get a certain time? And I mean, you're doing at the moment 5, 10K, looking at the
Five,
aspirations.
10, half.
Okay, so
Yeah.
have you got like key
So
metrics, or is it a bit more loose
yeah,
than that?
basically, so you'll get paid what they call like the base fee. So that is essentially your base salary, where I'll get paid. I have an agent as well, so he takes 15% of my base fee. But then also the biggest thing for athletes in a contract is what we call bonuses. So bonuses are just essentially a structure of certain times or performances within a race, a position that you finish that can activate more
Nice.
money. And if you activate them as well, they're essentially worth double because you get paid whatever the bonus is. Like say you activate like just for argument's sake, like a $5,000 bonus, you would get that paid outright as your bonus, but it also gets what we call rolled over onto your contract. So
Nice.
the following year, you get that added on to your base because essentially the brand look at it as if you've earned that as your bonus, you've then leveled up as an athlete. So we think you're
Yeah,
worth that at base fee, if that makes sense. But obviously, as you get better, the times get quicker. Activating your bonuses is significantly harder if your base fee is higher, and that's kind of how it works. But at the end of the day, I've always had big aspirations to make the Olympic Games, and
nice.
if we make an Olympic Games, I'd be super satisfied with
So
my career.
how's that coming around? What's the in what discipline and can we just delve into that and what your kind of training looks like now and how the fueling fits into that?
Yeah, so at the moment we're kind of on a bit of a full send towards LA in 2028, and the trainings for me it's starting to ramp up significantly. I mean, my current coach, I've been with him just over a year now, and my volume now from when I was at university, I'm now up to sort of 90 to 100 miles a week. But again, that is going to go up to probably 110 to 120 miles a week as I move into the marathon. But again, I'm able to kind of do that now with being a professional. But the way our kind of training week works is we only really have like two actual intense days. So that's kind of changed from university, but we do double sessions. So we'll do a training like a somewhat hardish session in the morning, and then we'd also do it again in the evening. So we're able to do that, which is massive. And I wouldn't be able to do that if I was kind of working. And again, in terms of fueling, I mean, out on camp at the moment, I'm very fortunate because some of the guys are significantly better cooks than I am because I'm absolutely useless in the kitchen. So yeah, we got Scott Beattie who's very, very good, and he's kind of keeping us alive, really, to be honest. So we kind of try and pull together there. And then when I'm at home, my partner loves cooking.
So
So
what's your go-to
we
if
do
I
all
was to
that.
be coming over to America tonight and I
Mm.
mean I'm not training at all really, but if you've just done a session, what's the go-to? Do you sit around together? Is it like a social thing as well as anything else? And what
Yeah.
would a typical dinner be, for example, after a heavy day?
Yeah, we always sit together. This is the good thing is with my team, like my training partners, like they are good friends as well, which is what is really good because it's obviously difficult in like an individual sport. You'd think it's quite competitive, and it is very competitive. But I think I've kind of been fortunate of surrounding myself with such a good support system of people that I can train, work hard with, but also have a laugh on the outside with as well. And yeah, we can kind of do that. So we kind of come together even in meal times, sit down, have a socialize. We're a bunch of pretty extroverted people, to be honest with you. So it can get quite loud. But yeah, typical. I mean, again, because we are training hard, we don't want to spend loads and loads of time in the kitchen either. So we just want to kind of tick the boxes, but we're not massively fussy, which is a good thing. We all eat pretty much everything. The typical evening meal at the moment, anyway, has been sort of like chicken, pasta. We'd throw in some onions, might have mushrooms in, peppers, carrots, whatever it be, with a tomato sauce, something like that. Or we had chili the other night, and we just kind of mix it up, switching between pastas or rice, and then switching between sort of red meat, sort of like mince or beef, and then chicken, basically, just
Have
to
you
mix
fallen
it
for
up.
the American desserts yet? So I mean, they love an ice cream, don't they? There must be
Uh,
stuff in there.
there are. I'll be completely honest with you, James. Their Ben and Jerry's selection is
It's
is
unbelievable.
outright. It's actually unbelievable. My eyes light up whenever we get down to that aisle. When we're looking at the boring stuff, like just taking home boxes of pasta, I'm like just wanting to
It's down
Screw
the
them all.
Solero aisle.
Yeah, let's get down there. Exactly. Let's get down to the ice cream aisle. Come on.
Love
And
it.
the others are exactly the same as well. When we're in the shop, whenever we're out doing a food shop, I even got a call the other day from Rory, my training partner, saying, "Look, mate, you really need to get yourself down to the ice cream selection.
But
It's unbelievable."
have you ever tracked? Do you have any idea in like rough calories you have to eat a day? Like, have you ever thought about that?
No, but this is the crazy thing is when I did track it, and I do eat a lot. Like I'm sort of snacking throughout the day, all the time, and it came out as like I was slightly under. I was like, oh my God, like I don't think I've got all the time in the day to be eating anymore. Like honestly, it feels like I'm eating something all the time, just because of how much I train. I think my
Yeah.
body is always craving it, and I don't mind it because I do love food. So
But
you
it's
know,
a hard, like, that's the thing. I mean, people don't always think, oh, 3, 4, 5,000 calories or whatever you might need in a day. How
yeah,
hard do you do that when you've got to be training, when you've got to be doing your rehab, and you've got to be sleeping and downtime. So actually, like this idea of just eating when you need to eat, is good that you can do it intuitively. But a lot of people go wrong with that, don't they? Because they are unable to get it right or focus too much on the protein, which means they don't have enough food, and it's a bit of a fine balance. It seems to be you guys are doing it right. I guess I'm conscious of your time, Ed. I mean, I could talk to you
that's all
literally
right.
all day, but just a few things from me. So, um, if you were going into, I mean, I suppose the longest distance you've done so far is half marathons, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, half marathon.
do you do carb loading in that, like a kind of a mini load? Or?
Yeah, yeah. So day before with a half marathon, because the thing is because I'm running for basically like an hour, like I've run 62 minutes, and I want to get that down to sort of like 60 minutes really. I'm basically on. It's a tricky one, right? Because like obviously carb stores, we're looking at like an hour, and it is tricky. But when you're running at like that sort of pace over the half, you don't really want to be taking anything. And that one is quite a grey area because again, like I say, it's really touch and go as to whether you can fight off
Yeah, yeah.
use your carb stores. But day before, I'm heavy on the carbs. I go quite big the day before a half and just make sure I'm fully stored up, ready for the next day. And then the morning of the race, because it's obviously typically pretty early morning because it's a half marathon, it's a long way. They want to get it at sort of the coolest time of the day as well. And we're currently not in. Well, we are. There are some half marathons going on, but I typically run in them sort of like September, October. It can get quite warm, so we run them early. So I have my breakfast super early, and I'll just have because I know I've carb loaded the day before. I'll have a toast, typically like Nutella on toast or jam on toast, and then I basically have like a drink mix, which is a carbohydrate drink mix. It just goes with water essentially, and I'll just sip on that for pretty much from like 2 hours out from the race, all the way up until pretty much the race starts. And if I feel like I need any more when I'm doing my warm up jog, I'll have like a gel that'll be sort
No.
of like a 40, it'll be probably around 40 grams carb gel.
Do you caffeine up or not? Is that a,
Yeah, I'll always have a coffee. Yeah, I'll always have a coffee. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, yeah, before any race, I will always find time for a coffee, no matter what time it is in the day.
interesting how like when you up your mileage to the marathon, how things have to adjust even further. So it's
Mm,
like you're navigating the different kind of races and demands.
yeah,
It's interesting.
and obviously my nutrition becomes much more important over the marathon because I think nutrition, especially like in this day and age in the marathon, has a super big impact. And I mean, in running, we've seen the big advances in footwear, especially with essentially the known super shoes.
Yeah.
But nutrition has a big part to play, and I'm kind of like when I go to the marathon, I know for sure that nutrition's going to have to come to sort of like the forefront of my sort of training and making sure that I'm doing the right things and obviously fueling in the race. That will have to happen, and it has to start early in a race. You
Yeah.
don't want to have to do it. You don't want to be sort of fueling when it's too late because you can't bring it back.
Interesting, really
So,
interesting. That's something for another day, I think, when we come and see you in another
yeah,
couple of years, like when you're there or thereabouts. But
definitely.
so just one last key question. We'll do a little few quick fire ones. So what lessons do you think you've learned from about fueling your body over the kind of course of your career, and how have other people influenced that? Not necessarily nutritionists, or it might be insights from people that have maybe gone the wrong way, or vice versa.
Yeah, I think for me, maintaining a quality of training, nutrition has the big part to play with that. And I can tell if I haven't fueled properly, the quality of that session is just so far off what it should be, and you can kind of feel it as well when you're sort of training. So competing at this sort of level, every session is so important, and I think if I don't fuel properly, I can kind of tell, and I also then just lose out on a high quality session really. And like I say, I've been super chilled around food, and I make sure that I'm eating plenty and being around people that have kind of like struggled with food as well. It's I think that in a way it's sort of helped me, because it's quite a scary aspect of underfueling, to be completely honest with you. And for me, I don't worry about weight at all, and I'm typically a bigger guy in this space in running. But I mean, the performances kind of talk for themselves.
I guess
you
there's
only
an
have to
element
look at it.
like, again, I'm just thinking the injury space in runners, it's high pressure, high stress on your bones, and stress fractures are kind of almost commonplace in
Yeah,
when you're doing
massive.
a load. Have you had any injuries just quickly that we can touch on, or anything that you had to
No, touch wood.
go?
Touch wood. It's things have actually been really good. I mean, the only real issues I get are sort of like tendon problems whenever we're doing sort of like quicker work, but bone related stuff I've always been pretty strong. And I think a part to play with that is that my strength and conditioning base was pretty good when I went to university, because I came from a coach that was pretty much more dominantly in the S&C space than running really, and he mixed the two. So
Oh,
he built
nice.
me up quite a big foundation before I went to university, so I was able to essentially do the workload. But obviously nutrition then has to be utilized. And for me, I look at nutrition and be a bit like, if I was to sacrifice it and want to kind of like lose a bit of weight, it's not worth it, because the performances, you might see one or two performance in that phase that we might call the honeymoon phase, but then getting injured, I know I struggle when I'm injured. I mean, when I've had like tendon problems mentally, I struggle. Not when I've done a run, it sets me up for the day. You know, it's a big thing.
It
It's like a
sounds like
drug.
you're pretty intuitive and honed in on like how you feel, your body being quite good at just kind of noticing it, and you acting quite kind of intuitively, and then listening to your body in training in terms of, the metrics that you're performing, and it all being tied in as one. Because sometimes people kind of isolate things like, nutrition is just nutrition, and I'm boxing that off and I'm boxing that off, when
Yeah,
it seems that you've got more of a kind of holistic approach to just making sure you're enjoying yourself ultimately.
yeah, for sure. And I think things have improved since university, for sure, as you can probably imagine. And just sort of like replacing junk things like chocolate and sweets and whatever it would have been, like cookies and things like that, with a bit more like healthier options, but also just better for me options. Like I said before, like yogurts, they're huge. They get used quite a lot because of the protein, and also it's very fulfilling, really.
Yeah, nice. Just to finish up at Ellis, and like I said, I'd always chew your ear off. I really enjoy chatting to you and then seeing how you're getting on, because I like to live vicariously through my ex-students, and you're one of the successful ones. So it's nice to see the progress and how well you've done. But just quick fire. So one food that you can't live without. You can't say Solero.
Um, the, it's, I mean, for me, it's probably pizza. Like I love a pizza. And
What's your go-to topping?
uh, it'd definitely be a meat based one. To be honest with you, I mean, I had a pizza last night. To be honest, and I do love the classic pepperoni. It
That's solid choice.
really it does tick the box, and I think that's why it's so popular. To be honest, because it's good.
I always ask this question: apple pie or apple crumble?
Apple crumble all day long
Yeah,
with
100%.
custard all day
Oh,
long,
nice.
easy.
Okay. I can work
Yeah.
custard or ice cream. That's all good. And then just the last one, advice for young athletes. So young aspiring athletes, there's loads of them at St Mary's, but across the country that are there or thereabouts. They're struggling, or they're
Mm,
juggling the kind of grind, and they can see themselves in some of your stories. What advice would you
yeah.
give them, guys? Not necessarily about you,
Um,
just in general.
yeah, I think staying consistent is the biggest thing. Just keep turning up. I mean, I kept turning up and gradually chipped away, and it's sort of like, we do weeks and weeks of training, and we we then come to a race after those weeks of training, and sometimes we're expecting instant results. With this game, it is a slow process, so it does take time to actually see the results of the training pay off. So consistency is the biggest thing. And secondly, I always say to people, like, enjoy the journey. And I guess you can kind of pull nutrition into that, to be honest, because obviously my friend who struggled with eating disorder, Rowan, he might look back on his running journey with a bit of negativity. You want to look back when you're kind of done and be like, you know what, I gained quite a lot from the sport, gained some really positive memories, and I really enjoyed the journey. So enjoying the journey and just doing the process, just following sort of like your own process. Really, everyone's different. There's no set way to go about things.
Yeah, I love that. And hopefully we'll get Rowan on here as well and talk about his journey too, so you can kind of see how they tie up.
Yeah, definitely.
Where can we follow you? What's the next step? So you said you got an event in America, and then you mentioned
Yeah,
LA being a big target. So talk us through
yeah.
how we can follow your journey quickly.
Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, one of the things that we're doing as sort of like a team, I mean, you can follow us on Instagram under as Team Makou. Is we're kind of like, we are doing things slightly differently actually, and we do have YouTube videos up at the moment, and people can go back and see sort of like our training days and how things work like in and around camp. So we're trying to show people what pro life is sort of like, because there's kind of a lack of content around that. Obviously, people can follow me on my own Instagram, just as Ellis Cross. But the Team Makou one, I'd recommend people to go and check out. And we've been doing YouTube videos through the Distance Project over the past sort of like 6 months, but we're going to be starting up our own YouTube channel and going down that route and just kind of bringing people on that journey. So
Nice.
yeah, definitely keep eyes peeled for that, because we want to show people that it's, we can have a laugh. We can have a laugh with it. It's not a super intense environment.
And then races, like if in any race in the UK, we can keep an eye on, or
Um, at the moment, things are kind of still up in the air, because I don't know what my coach has planned in terms of my transition towards the marathon. But obviously, I've got the 10K in LA at the end of March, and then we'll sit down and reassess things. But I spend so much time on training camps, so I think I'll be racing then, probably in May, to be honest, because I race end of March, and I'm literally going home for like 2 weeks, and then I'm off again on training camp. But fortunately, it's in Europe, so I'll go to Fontremaux in the Pyrenees in France. So it's a bit easier when you're close to home. I struggle with the time difference, to be honest, on camp when I'm in America, especially like now. So yeah, I mean, at the moment, things are still up in the air with race plans.
nice. And what's your space for 2028? Eh?
Absolutely, we're all in on
Love it.
2028.
All the best, Dennis. I really appreciate you joining me today.
Thanks, James.
As it's like what 8 o'clock in the morning there.
Yeah,
Always great to catch up, and yeah, I'm a big fan. So yeah, I really appreciate your time.
no, thanks for having me, James.